think about in the New Yorker article by Michelle Goldberg,
Right.
which was showing radical feminists versus trans and trans activists.
Is that the center of a new argument in feminism between those who identify as feminists who embrace trans rights and women and men, and those who don't? Right? Is that an important new fault line, or?
Yeah, I don't think it's an important new fault line. I think it's actually really exaggerated by the article. I think the article gave a lot more, gave way too much credit to those radical feminists, including Sheila Jeffreys, because people like to think of feminism as that.
Right.
And those people were, they're not sex positive, in other words, being positive about women's or anybody's sexuality.
Yeah.
They're against sex work, against pornography, assuming that these are automatically forms of exploitation.
And this is a small number of the broad spectrum of feminism and feminists that we're talking about.
Exactly. So, it might be that they're against and don't accept trans women as women. But I think the majority of other feminists do. And in fact, trans women and trans men use feminism as a theory and a strategy for liberation as well, right? So I think on the most part, people work together.
Right. And they're reinforcing, they're mutually reinforcing.
Yeah, their struggles for social justice that deal with all kinds of discrimination.
Right.
In some ways they echo, the trans movement is about gender politics, right? Earlier, kind of more of a split came between people who are fighting against sexual oppression and gender oppression, and those are not exactly the same. But I think in this case, the trans movement and kind of the feminist movement there's no reason that they shouldn't draw on each other.
The argument between those feminists who believe and fight for trans rights and those who don't is not a new fault line in feminism. What is the new fault line in feminism? What's the future of feminism in terms of, are we in a new wave? What's the argument now amongst feminists? Is it really this collision with the idea of the economic structures playing a really big role in the way that women are able to lead their lives, such as the jobs they can have and the fight over the minimum wage, which mostly impacts disproportionately women and women of color in these low-wage jobs?
Yeah, I think that's where the strength of feminism lies. And again, I think this is supported transnationally. It's supported by kind of women's and movements around the world, which is fighting for structural forms of equality, right? Again, things that are against class divisions and the fact that the global north and the global south are increasingly seeing divisions in wealth and access to resources and so on. That's a feminist fight, and I think that's the kind of the biggest one. What we see most, I think, in the global north, or maybe in the U.S., is
U.S. and Europe and
exactly Australia, where is a kind of a focus often on women's rights, and I find that as much as I think it's important to think about kind of sexual violence in conflict and so on, these have been now put into international law. In fact, gender-based violence has been seen as a crime against humanity. This was legislated by actually Catherine McKinnon in the case of Bosnia and Rwanda. So those are big gains on the one hand, but on the other hand, by focusing on those kinds of things, it actually focuses again on individual rights, right? And doesn't look at the larger inequalities that make some women subject to violence and other women not.
Right.
So on one hand, I think what we see in the media all the time is women's rights, and that's something like Sheryl Sandberg takes up women's rights. We have to
lean in. The head of Facebook, which is women, you have all the rights that you need now. You just go out there and tackle the world, and kind of act like a man. Sort of like Steve Harvey argument, right? Just act like a man, and you're good to go. It's a wrap.
Exactly. We've achieved equality.
Right. It's done.
It's done. Whereas I think the more, as you were saying, revolutionary types of feminism actually challenge the larger imperialist, white supremacist, capitalist patriarchies, which include challenging the ways in which some women can't get jobs, some women can't, and not just women again. I think it's the ways in which some kinds of people don't get jobs, some kinds of people get discriminated, some kinds of people are more subject to violence than others.
Right.
Alliances are uncomfortable and not clear. It's not that you can align with women. What does that mean exactly?
Right. Because,
again, something Bell Hooks says, that, white women largely align with white men. Right? So where is the movement going to be? And I think it's fraught. Who knows? Well, it's to be fought out. But I think a lot of people are coming together in different alliances that are temporary. They don't say, this is what we are and this is the way it is. It's like, we need to fight this fight and then we'll fight that fight.
Right. And we may not fight it with the same people.
Exactly.
We believe the same about gay marriage, that marriage, gay marriage as well, imports a lot of the structures and strictures into it.
I do. I do. And, again, I'm not against gay marriage in the sense that the ways in which people get rights is through marriage, right? And I think everybody should have equal rights. You should be able to kind of have, go see your loved one in the hospital.
Right.
Too.
Right.
I mean, there's many, many things. So I think that's incredibly important. I just wish all our rights weren't attached to marriage, full stop, right?
Right.
So what if I live with my sister, right? Why can't I have rights in that sense?
Right.
I think many different forms of relationality, many forms of kinship should be recognized.
That's right.
Aside from that particular unit. One of the strengths for me about feminist thought, I guess would say, is that it's also a way of knowing the world. So it's not just a kind of a struggle, but it's literally seeing the way you said, that things are actually not as firm as we might have thought, right? And that to understand how to engage in the world, we have to understand the way the world has been represented. Right. And a lot of that has been, for instance, if you think about forms of science, like the egg and the sperm being represented, as we spoke about before, the sperm being represented as active and the egg being represented as passive. So our cultural ideas of what gender is being put onto forms of science and what we understand as objective. And feminists have challenged that and shown us that to know the world in a particular way is also to be able to act in the world in a particular way. I think that's incredibly valuable. Feminism is not just about kind of feminine gendered bodies. It's just not. It can't be. It's about a social justice for all of us. I mean, the forms of masculinity that are imposed on boys are incredibly oppressive, right? So feminism should, I mean, as you're saying, you can choose now to come in and out and embrace the parts of masculinity that you want and the parts of femininity that you want. But I think that counterpart to that particular Betty Friedan femininity and masculinity is oppressive to both kind of men and women.
That's right. And the minute that women get to say, I'm no longer subservient, and I don't have to be subservient to you legally, socially, economically, or sexually, it then challenges all types of subservience that are then enforced.
Exactly.
Which is what's been really important about it and continues to be really important about it.
Yeah.
And so that explains why if someone who you would be, I mean, in some respects, the Beyonce argument for bell hooks is the exact opposite, but the parallel one of you and your mother, right? Like she feels that Beyonce is the one, to a certain degree, who's coming and imposing a specific idea of gender on her and on girls and women that she interacts with, and that's oppressive.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
And that's what, and maybe perhaps that ultimately is the entire point, is that we stop having to have one particular way of domination, of image, of being, and the way in which we in our day-to-day lives enforce that.
Absolutely.